In southeastern Turkey stands Göbekli Tepe, a site so old that it predates agriculture.
So what's emerging as a result, if Göbekli Tepe hadn't been found, none of this would have happened.
Grok just finished processing 30 years of Göbekli Tepe data, and it found something carved into the oldest pillar that no human researcher ever caught. Not because they weren't looking, but because no single human mind could hold enough information at once to see it. What Grok found changes the answer to the most important question in human history. Who built this place? And how did they know what they knew? The discovery that broke history. In 1994, a Kurdish shepherd noticed something strange jutting from the dry soil of a hilltop near Şanlıurfa in southeastern Turkey. A carved stone surface, deliberately shaped, protruding from earth that had covered it for millennia. He reported it to local authorities. German archaeologist Klaus Schmidt, then based at the German Archaeological Institute in Istanbul, came to investigate. Schmidt knelt in that dirt and understood within days that he was standing on something that should not exist. What lay beneath the surface was not a single structure. It was a complex. Massive, planned, intentional, constructed thousands of years before any civilization was supposed to have the capacity to build it. He never stopped excavating. He returned every season until his death in 2014. 20 years of his life given entirely to a site he once described as having changed everything he thought he knew. He was right. It had. At least 20 stone circles have been identified at Göbekli Tepe, structures that look nothing like previously documented houses from the pre-pottery Neolithic. Each features massive T-shaped limestone monoliths arranged in carefully planned rings. These are not crude slabs dragged into rough formation. They are precisely carved pillars shaped to consistent geometric tolerances. Some standing 18 feet tall, some weighing 50 tons. Decorated with intricate relief carvings executed with a level of skill and control that takes the breath away, even now. Foxes, lions, vultures, scorpions, snakes, bulls, geometric patterns of interlocking shapes, abstract symbols whose meaning has resisted 3 decades of analysis. And on the largest central pillars, something more unsettling still. Carved arms running down the sides, hands meeting at the front. These pillars are not abstract monuments. They are stylized human figures. Something is depicted standing at the center of these circles, watching, waiting, recording.
Yeah.
And this is
The conventional explanation goes like this. Nomadic hunter-gatherer bands, motivated by emerging religious impulses, periodically converged on this hilltop. Using stone tools, they quarried these massive limestone pillars from bedrock outcroppings nearby. They transported them. They erected them in precisely planned circular arrangements. They maintained the site across centuries. Then, around 8000 BCE, for reasons that remain genuinely mysterious, they deliberately buried the entire complex under thousands of tons of carefully placed fill dirt. It is a compelling story. It has one serious problem. The engineering does not work. Even with modern heavy equipment, quarrying, transporting, and erecting a 50-ton carved limestone monolith is a significant undertaking. Now remove the machinery. Remove the metal cutting tools. Remove the wheeled vehicles. Remove the domesticated animals that might provide hauling power. You are left with human muscle, stone implements, and whatever wooden or rope technology Neolithic people possessed. Experimental archaeology has tried repeatedly to replicate Göbekli Tepe's stonework using only period-appropriate tools. Teams have roughed out basic shapes in limestone with stone hammers and antler picks. They have moved modest weights using sledges and rollers. What they have not managed, not once, is anything approaching the surface finish, the geometric precision, or the detailed relief carving visible on the original pillars. The gap is not a small discrepancy. It is a chasm. And the construction is only the beginning of what doesn't fit. Here's where it gets strange. The builders were not just skilled with stone. They possessed something that had no business existing in 9600 BCE. And Grok found it hiding in plain sight, on a carved pillar that every archaeologist had already walked past. What Grok found that humans missed. 2026. Researchers assembled the most comprehensive data set ever compiled on a single archaeological site. Every three-dimensional scan ever taken of Göbekli Tepe's pillars and enclosures. Every ground-penetrating radar survey of the surrounding plateau. Every astronomical analysis. Every catalog of carved symbols. Every geological study. Every comparative analysis linking Göbekli Tepe to related sites across the region. 30 years of intensive research from dozens of independent teams across multiple disciplines, unified into a single data set.
This is the belly on the mound explaining the name.
Chance.
Grok processed all of it simultaneously. That last sentence matters. No human researcher working in archaeology can simultaneously process astronomy, geology, linguistics, and engineering at the depth required to detect cross-disciplinary patterns. A geologist does not have the astronomical database. An astronomer does not have the linguistic pattern tools. An archaeologist has neither. The boundaries between academic fields are not just institutional, they are cognitive. No single person can hold 30 years of multidisciplinary data in their mind at once. Grok can. And what it found in the first pass stopped everything. The carved symbols covering the T-shaped pillars had been catalogued for 30 years. Archaeologists had argued about their meaning without reaching consensus. Some called them decorative. Others proposed totemic or religious significance. The symbols remained stubbornly undeciphered, treated as art whose meaning had been lost to time. Grok did not see art, it saw structure. The AI's pattern recognition identified approximately 47 distinct symbol types distributed across the enclosures in ways that are statistically impossible to attribute to chance. This is the belly on the mound, explaining the name. These symbols do not appear randomly. They appear in specific combinations, in specific positions, with specific frequencies that vary systematically across different pillar locations and enclosure orientations. Stop and think about what that actually means. Randomness would scatter these symbols without pattern. Decoration would cluster them aesthetically. What Grok found is neither, it is grammar. When Grok analyzed which symbols appeared together, which appeared in isolation, and which correlated with specific astronomical alignments, it detected something 3 decades of human scholarship had missed entirely. A computational linguist brought in at the University of Edinburgh to review the findings, looked at the distribution data, and went quiet for a long moment. What she said when she spoke. The symbol distribution exhibits statistical properties consistent with meaning transmission rather than artistic expression. What Grok identified shows characteristics of deliberate information encoding. This is a communication system designed to convey specific data. That's a proto-writing system carved into stone 11,600 years ago by people who were supposedly incapable of writing anything. If what Grok just found in those symbols unsettles you, you're going to want to stay close for what comes next. Subscribe and hit the bell. We are nowhere near done. Then Grok did something no single human researcher had ever thought to do. It cross-referenced those symbols simultaneously against astronomical databases, geological records, and climate data from around 9,600 BCE, when Göbekli Tepe's main structures were being erected. Not one at a time, all at once. The correlations had been invisible for 30 years because seeing them required holding 4 disciplines in parallel. Grok held all 4, and what it found was not ambiguous. Specific animal symbols correspond to specific constellations as they appeared in the sky above southeastern Turkey 11,600 years ago. Certain geometric patterns match representations of solar and lunar cycles. Abstract symbols correlate with documented geological and climate events from the same period. Events the builders, by all conventional accounts, should have had no systematic way to track. The carvings are not mythology. They are not decoration. They are a systematic record of a specific historical period. A period the geological and climate evidence independently confirms was marked by catastrophic environmental upheaval. But here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. The symbols are not only recording what happened, they are encoding the understanding that it would happen again. The builders weren't just keeping a diary. They were building a warning system. And the key to understanding exactly what they were warning about was carved onto one specific pillar. The most debated stone in the entire complex, Pillar 43. The date carved in stone. Archaeologists call it Pillar 43. Most researchers who have studied it call it the vulture stone. It is covered in carved imagery that resists easy explanation. A vulture with a wing outstretched, a scorpion, a crane, geometric symbols, circles, a prominent disc. It has been photographed, analyzed, and debated since the day it was excavated. In 2017, Martin Sweatman, a researcher at the University of Edinburgh, published an analysis suggesting the pillar depicted a specific comet impact event around 10,950 BCE.
The site was noticed in the 1960s, but for years, no one realized what it actually was.
With the animal figures encoding the positions of constellations as they appeared in the sky at the moment of impact. It was a significant proposal. The archaeological establishment received it with skepticism, filed it under interesting but unverified, and mostly moved on. Grok did not move on. It went deeper. The AI did not analyze Pillar 43's imagery in isolation. It compared every carved element against astronomical position databases spanning thousands of years of recorded celestial history, against geological event records, against climate data, and against impact crater databases, all simultaneously. What came back was not a single layer of meaning. It was multiple simultaneous layers of encoded information compressed into one carved surface. The animal figures do represent constellations, specifically the positions of those constellations as they appeared in the summer solstice sky above Göbekli Tepe around 10,900 BCE, not approximately. When Grok reconstructed the precise night sky for that date and location, the correspondence with the carved arrangement was exact. The geometric symbols encode numerical information using a counting system based on the deliberate arrangement of carved elements. A system consistent across multiple pillars, invisible until Grok's pattern recognition identified the underlying grammar. And the prominent circle, the disk that researchers had long assumed represented the sun, represents something else entirely. It is the signature in the night sky of either a supernova or an exceptionally bright incoming comet. An astrophysicist at the University of Edinburgh reviewed Grok's astronomical calculations and described the precision as extraordinary. Stellar positions, solar positions, and event timing encoded in the pillar symbolism align with what independent geological and astronomical records confirm about that period. The correlation probability, he calculated, is less than 1 in 50,000. That number is not a rounding error. When Grok mapped all of this together, the date encoded in Pillar 43's symbolism aligned precisely with the onset of the Younger Dryas. The site was noticed in the 1960s, but for years, no one realized what it actually was. The period when evidence from multiple independent scientific disciplines confirms that comet fragments struck Earth, triggering catastrophic climate disruption, driving megafaunal extinctions across multiple
They were
continents.
hunter-gatherers, people we once thought lived in small short-term groups.
And devastating human populations worldwide. The beginning of a 1,000-year climate catastrophe, encoded in limestone by people who were standing on that hill when it started. Pillar 43 is not mythology. It is not religious art. It is a date stamp carved in stone, preserving the precise moment that disaster struck human civilization 11,600 years ago. But here is what that realization forces you to ask. If the builders possessed the astronomical knowledge to record a specific celestial event with that level of precision, the question is no longer whether they were sophisticated. The question is how sophisticated and where that sophistication came from. Because Grok, analyzing the remaining 19 enclosures as a unified system, found a pattern in the stones that answers that question in the most disturbing way possible. A library with dedicated wings. When Grok analyzed all 20 enclosures at Göbekli Tepe as a unified system, rather than a collection of individual structures, the picture that emerged was unlike anything conventional archaeology had proposed. The enclosures are not separate monuments built at different times by different groups. They form an integrated information system, with each enclosure encoding different categories of the knowledge the builders were determined to preserve. Grok measured the alignments. The organization is not approximate. It is deliberate, and it is measurable. Enclosures featuring predominantly serpent symbolism cluster together and show astronomical alignments calibrated to equinox events. Enclosures dominated by fox imagery show different alignments, oriented to specific stellar positions. The vulture enclosure, containing Pillar 43, aligns with solstice events. Different sections of the site preserve different categories of knowledge: astronomy, geological events, climate patterns, each encoded in separate but interconnected structures, cross-referenced through the shared symbolic language running across the entire complex. This is not a temple. It is a library with dedicated wings. And then Grok detected something that changes the entire story of how this library came to exist. Precision declines. The earliest enclosures, the oldest structures at the site, show the highest level of astronomical accuracy. Grok measured their alignments against optimal celestial positions.
There are these incredible T-shaped pillars which would have been holding up a huge roof.
And found an average deviation of just 0.4 degrees. The middle period enclosures, built centuries later, show deviations of between 1.2 and 2 degrees. The latest enclosures deviate by an average of 2.8 degrees. Stop for a second. Think about what that actually means. They were hunter-gatherers, people we once thought lived in small, short-term groups. As the site aged and expanded, the astronomical knowledge guiding its construction was degrading at a measurable, consistent rate across generations. The physical construction follows the same pattern. Pillar size decreases across the construction sequence. The depth of carved relief work diminishes. Symbolic systems that appear in their full complexity in the earliest enclosures become simpler, less layered, less precise in the later phases. The oldest sections of Göbekli Tepe represent the peak of everything the site achieves. Everything built afterward represents a gradual, measurable decline from that peak. This is the opposite of how human knowledge works. Knowledge accumulates, precision improves, techniques refine. Every model of civilizational progress assumes that later means better. At Göbekli Tepe, later means worse. The builders were not developing their capabilities as they worked. They were losing them. The knowledge they were trying to record in stone was slipping away from them, even as they built the structures designed to preserve it. Grok's conclusion from this pattern is precise. The builders of Göbekli Tepe were not inventing this knowledge. They were inheriting it. They arrived already in possession of sophisticated capabilities they had not themselves developed. Capabilities they were struggling to maintain and failing measurably, generation by generation. And then the ground-penetrating radar data added a layer that changes the timeline entirely. Engineering that shouldn't exist. Buried beneath the visible enclosures, beneath the structures archaeologists have spent 30 years excavating, lie earlier construction phases. Older structures, different in architectural style, but sharing the same symbolic systems. Detected in subsurface surveys, but not yet fully excavated. Grok's analysis of the limited data available from these buried layers suggests they may predate the famous T-pillar enclosures by centuries, possibly by a millennium, potentially pushing the site's true origins back to 12,000 BCE or earlier. Göbekli Tepe may not be the beginning of this knowledge preservation project. It may be the middle of it. And when Grok examined the physical construction of the visible structures, what it found in the stonework itself makes that possibility harder to dismiss. The AI examined high-resolution photogrammetry of the T-shaped pillars, analyzing tool marks, surface characteristics, and geometric precision across dozens of examples. The conventional explanation assigns the stonework to percussion flaking, stone struck against stone, combined with whatever abrasive techniques Neolithic toolkits allowed. The surfaces of Göbekli Tepe's pillars tell a different story. Some surfaces show evidence of sustained grinding and polishing, requiring controlled, consistent abrasion with harder materials applied over extended periods. There are these incredible T-shaped pillars, which would have been holding up a huge roof. Other surfaces show linear cut marks with characteristics suggesting sawing motions. Straight, consistent in depth, showing no deviation when crossing materials of varying hardness within the same stone. The geometric precision of the T-shapes, measured across dozens of pillars, maintains consistency within 2 to 3% tolerance. That implies either standardized physical templates or systematic measuring techniques. We have no evidence that either existed in Neolithic Turkey. Experimental archaeology has confronted this problem honestly. Teams attempting to replicate Göbekli Tepe's stonework using only period-appropriate tools have produced results that fall consistently short. Basic shapes can be roughed out. What cannot be replicated, not once across decades of attempts, is the surface finish, the precise geometry, the detailed controlled relief carving executed across the full height and width of pillars weighing 50 tons. The gap between experimental results and the actual monuments is not marginal, it is fundamental. But here's what nobody expected when Grok analyzed the structural engineering.
And with pillars in situ since around 12,000 years. And with very high pillars, the central ones here have a height of 5.50 meters.
When the AI examined how the enclosures were designed, pillar positioning, wall construction, the relationship between structural elements, it detected engineering principles that modern architects associate with seismic resilience. The enclosures are built in a seismically active region. They have survived there for over 11,000 years. That survival is not accidental. The pillars are not simply set into bedrock and held rigid. They are positioned with slight gaps between structural elements. Gaps that allow differential movement during seismic activity without transferring destructive force through the entire structure. The fill material surrounding the pillars shows careful layering of differently sized stones, creating a flexible matrix capable of absorbing shock rather than transmitting it. Modern seismic engineering formalized these principles in the 20th century after systematic study of earthquake damage across thousands of structures. A structural engineer specializing in ancient architecture reviewed Grok's findings and was direct. You do not accidentally create earthquake-resistant structures. The capability requires systematic engineering knowledge, developed either through a long tradition of monumental construction or inherited from an earlier source. Neither option fits comfortably within what conventional archaeology attributes to Neolithic hunter-gatherers. And then there is the burial. When Grok analyzed the composition and placement of the fill material used to deliberately enter the site around 8000 BCE, it found no evidence of casual abandonment. Larger stones were placed specifically to shield carved surfaces. Voids were maintained around critical pillars to prevent crushing damage. Layers were arranged to promote drainage and inhibit the moisture accumulation that degrades limestone over millennia. The people who buried Göbekli Tepe understood preservation engineering. They were not walking away from something finished. These people were still hunting and gathering, even as they built monuments. They were protecting something they could no longer maintain. Sealing a message they trusted the future to eventually read, which raises the question Grok could not ignore. Were they doing this alone, or was this part of something much larger? A network spanning centuries. Göbekli Tepe did not exist in isolation. When Grok extended its analysis beyond the primary site to examine 12 other megalithic complexes in the surrounding region, what emerged was not a collection of independent local monuments. It was a coordinated system. Karahan Tepe, Harbetsuvan, Sayonu, and the other sites share symbolic systems, construction techniques, and astronomical alignments with Göbekli Tepe in ways that cannot be attributed to coincidence or parallel development. Grok mapped the connections across all 12 sites simultaneously, something no human research team had done before, because doing it required holding the complete data sets from all 12 sites in parallel. What it found: a network spanning 200 kilometers, maintained across 15 centuries, all constructed during roughly the same period, all encoding similar information, all eventually buried with the same deliberate care. This was not one community's project. It was a regional program. Grok calculated the logistical requirements of maintaining this network. The workforce needed to quarry, transport, and erect the Uaowandu monuments. The resource allocation required to feed and coordinate that workforce, the communication and planning necessary to maintain consistent symbolic systems and astronomical alignments across sites separated by significant distances. What those calculations describe is not a loose confederation of nomadic bands converging on sacred hilltops. What they describe is a population base and organizational structure comparable to early state-level societies. Conventional chronology places the emergence of such societies in this region 5,000 years after Göbekli Tepe was buried. Either that chronology is wrong, or the social complexity existed in a form that left minimal permanent trace, because it was organized around mobility rather than settled infrastructure. Both options are uncomfortable. Neither can be ruled out. And with the pillars in situ since around 12,000 years, and with very high pillars, the central ones here have a height of 5.5 meters. Then Grok detected something in the symbolic record that pushed the implications beyond this region entirely. Specific symbols from Göbekli Tepe and Karahan Tepe, the HH symbols, serpent motifs, particular geometric configurations, appear at sites hundreds, and in some cases thousands, of miles away. From Çatalhöyük in central Turkey, to Neolithic sites across the Levant, to locations in North Africa. The distribution is not random. It forms a symbol horizon, a period of shared symbolic vocabulary spread across a geographic range far exceeding what local cultural exchange would produce. And that horizon correlates chronologically with the Younger Dryas, the same catastrophic climate disruption that Pillar 43 records with such precision. Here's the question Grok's algorithms flag, and it has no comfortable answer. Could this distribution represent survivors of catastrophic events moving across regions, carrying their symbolic knowledge with them? Could Göbekli Tepe be one node in a broader knowledge preservation effort undertaken simultaneously across multiple regions by people responding to the same disaster? The cycle encoding Grok detected makes that possibility more disturbing still. The builders were not only recording a single catastrophe, they were encoding the understanding that such events recur. The 25,920-year precession cycle appears encoded in the spatial arrangement of the enclosures. Shorter cycles tied to solar activity appear in pillar positioning. The astronomical knowledge embedded in Göbekli Tepe was not historical record alone. It was predictive. The builders understood that the catastrophe they had witnessed or inherited knowledge of would return, and they built accordingly. A geophysicist reviewing these findings was precise about what that means. The astronomical cycles Grok identified are real and measurable. Precession, orbital variations, solar cycles do correlate with climate shifts and potentially with impact event probabilities. Whether the builders arrived at this understanding through their own long observation or through inherited knowledge from an earlier source remains unknown. But the cycle tracking capability exists in the monument itself. That is not interpretation, that is measurement. Which brings us, finally, to the question the title of this video promised to answer. Who built Göbekli Tepe? Grok cannot give a name. What it can give is a profile built from 30 years of evidence, processed without the disciplinary boundaries that kept human researchers from seeing the full picture. The builders possessed sophisticated astronomy. They had systematic engineering knowledge. They used a symbolic language capable of transmitting complex information across millennia. They had either developed or inherited capabilities our conventional timeline says should not have existed for thousands of years more. They knew a catastrophe had come before. They understood, with terrible clarity, that it would come again. And they built a warning system designed to outlast the collapse of everything else they had built. The evidence is clear on one point. This knowledge was not invented at Göbekli Tepe. The declining precision across the enclosures, 0.4 degrees in the oldest structures, 2.8 degrees in the latest, tells the story of inherited capability, not developed capability. Whoever these people were, they received this knowledge from somewhere. And what they received was already more sophisticated than anything they were able to maintain. The pillars are still there, standing on that Turkish plateau. Carvings still visible, alignment still measurable, coded warnings still readable by anyone with the technology to understand them. The builders chose stone because stone endures. They chose symbols because symbols can be decoded without a shared spoken language. They chose astronomical alignments because celestial mechanics never changes. They built a message specifically designed to survive the collapse of everything else. Grok has now processed 30 years of data across archaeology, astronomy, geology, and engineering simultaneously. What it found is not speculation. It is pattern recognition applied to measurable evidence. And the pattern is unambiguous. Either Neolithic hunter-gatherers achieved capabilities our entire model of human development cannot account for, or they inherited those capabilities from a civilization whose existence our history books have not yet acknowledged. The evidence is clear. What it points to, we are only now beginning to read. The stones have been waiting 11,000 years. We finally have the tools to listen. If this changed how you think about what we actually know, share it with someone who's ready to ask the same question. The answer matters, and we've only just started pulling at the thread.